Welcome to the Fintech Founder Journey, where we explore fintech and the founders that power it. We look at how to build better fintech products, better fintech businesses, and how to work on yourself to be more successful in all that you do. I'm your host, Mike Scott, and I'm also the co-founder and CEO of Nona Digital, an expert firm that accelerates product development for fintech and blockchain scale-ups. In today's show, I'm joined by Elliott Donazzan, co-founder at Payble, and we'll be talking about the billions of dollars that late payments are costing Australian businesses every year and his journey so far in trying to solve this. Today's episode is sponsored by ourselves, Nona Digital. Working with us to accelerate your fintech or blockchain product, you get access to deeply skilled and experienced designers and engineers that have been building products together for a very long time. You get the benefit of a studio that is big enough for no key person dependencies to exist, but small enough so that you're always close to the principals. And you get the benefit of our reusable component library, which basically means we're often able to build your product faster than anyone else could at a comparable standard. To get in touch with one of our principals or myself, head over to nona.digital to book a consultation directly. And now onto the show. Today, my guest is Elliott Donazzan, who's building an interesting fintech in the payment space. Elliott started his career at PwC and has gone on to found at least two startups that I could find, one in the travel space, the other in the media space, and then went on to become strategy director for the Zoo Group, and then moved on to an investment manager position at Glenburn Private Capital. After that, Elliott joined Identity Limited, an ASX-listed company where he became the director of innovation. And that was his last role before co-founding Payble, which is his full focus today. Payble is a fintech that offers a better way to get paid, improve cash flow collection, lower transaction costs, and make failed or late payments a thing of the past. Payble raised $1 million earlier this year from CBA's X15 Ventures, which is a great vote of confidence for the young startup. Welcome, Elliott. It's great to have you on the show.
Mike, thank you so much. I'm so happy to be here.
Cool. So before we get into the business side of things, I have a question for you. When I was stalking you and researching you, one of the top Google results when you put your name into the Google machine is a live recording of a boxing match.
Oh, is that there, is it?
It was super cool to see.
Oh, wow.
Tell me all about you and your boxing. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, actually, so I was not a boxer growing up. I did love playing a lot of sport, but a couple years ago, I made this promise that each year I try and do something big for charity, because when you're working, you're constantly working, focusing on myself a lot and the business, it can be hard to sort of fit those things in. And so one year I did a fundraiser for the Cancer Council called Stars of the East, like a Dancing with the Stars type. We had 8 weeks to learn a dance and then performed it at a show, and it's a big fundraiser, and invite your mates or your colleagues, which is how you get big donations. So I did that, and then I thought the next year I should do a corporate boxing match. And that's because I always had this feeling like I wanted to know to box, because that's kind of cool. Secondly, fitness, but thirdly was the charity angle. So we spent, in fact, it was meant to be like a 12-week program, but because of the very first lockdown, and also I actually broke a rib during training, it ended up being a year of training before the match. And so we all got quite good, instead of it just being, a bit of fisticuffs, with the big gloves. By the end of the year, we'd all been training a year. And so it was a good standard of, intro to boxing, if you will. So that was that. We raised more than $50,000 on the night for, I think it was for Beyond Blue. So it was a lot of fun, and I've actually kept up the boxing now. So I've kept training with my coach, and I'm actually training for a fight in December this year. So it'll be my second amateur fight, but not a corporate fight. Call it a real fight.
Oh, I love it. And I was expecting, like, when I saw it, I was like, oh, this is interesting. Let me watch this. And I sort of skipped through, and I was expecting, shitty boxing, and I was pretty impressed. You're right. Like, it wasn't shit by any measurement. It was actually pretty damn good. I was like, this is really impressive. And I mean, look, not to read too much into that, but it doesn't surprise me. Many founders that I come across and speak to and I'm exposed to, there's often a correlation between really wanting to get good at stuff, continuous improvement as a value, and being a successful founder. So like whether it's boxing or ballroom dancing or gym or mountain biking, or it's very common actually. A lot of founders that I speak to have this commonality. And I mean, myself, I'm a very passionate mountain biker and a whole lot of other things. And I think it goes hand in hand. And I'm constantly drawing comparisons to mountain biking or training to business. They're really similar in many ways. But anyway, that was just a bit of fun. I love that. So if you're listening to this, go and Google Elliott's name and you'll find him beating the crap out of somebody else in a boxing room, which is always good to watch. Cool. So, Elliott, let's jump into your story. So you're working at Identity. It's a listed company on the ASX, and you decide you want to build a business to solve this problem. Talk me through that process. How did you kind of see this problem through the eyes of a creator? And what catalyzed you going, you know what, I'm actually gonna sort of dedicate my career to this now for the next X number of years. Talk me through that process from like realizing it, seeing it, and then turning it into a thing that exists.
Yeah, it's actually quite interesting how it started, because as you said, I was at Identity and was director of innovation there, working across a couple projects. And Identity builds AML software for banks. There's a number of tier one banks in production. If you Google them, you'll see a lot about their use cases of the blockchain. They've got some cool patents around the world on blockchain. But I wasn't on the blockchain focus. I was on a different focus. And we actually saw at Identity there was two things coming. One was the launch of the consumer data right in Australia, or what is, it's called CDR, but a lot of people know it as open banking being the first wave of the CDR. And the second thing was we actually had a project at Identity looking at something similar. It wasn't the Payble proposition, but I could see similarities with one of the pieces of tech they were working on internally. And so I actually there, sort of as I was working there and with open banking, I said we've got to put some resources into exploring how open banking can change what we do, how it works across the business on like not just one use case, but change how potentially Identity operates. And where that ended up is we actually said, no, let's go into a single problem statement and let's look at this thing that we identified that every year in Australia, millions of payments are missed by consumers. So missed means either they forgot to pay or didn't pay, or they tried to pay but didn't have money. And every one of those is costly, expensive to the business, but costly to the consumer in terms of stress or in terms of fees. So we actually had this conversation at Identity, and I said, look, and this was with, it was across two CEOs they had there. One was Nick Armstrong, who was the founder of the business. And then later on, he remained a director, and there was a new CEO, John Raymond, in the business. But I said, why don't we, I think there's a business here, and I think it's a better business as a startup and as a standalone venture that should be able to aggressively pursue via a lean startup methodology solving this problem. And let's put up a structure from the business to get a return on Identity's existing investments in this space, but also to bring in new investors and help this venture grow as a standalone, call it a spin-off or call it a JV, a separate structure, separate team, no reporting line other than a shareholder relationship. And they agreed to that. So that was sort of, it was both a natural startup, hey, there's a problem here, we should do some research, we should talk to people, we should try and solve it. But separately, Identity is an ASX listed business with strong governance. There was also a corporate solution. Why don't we look at this as a separate structure, support me as an entrepreneur and as a founder? And of course, Identity in return is a significant shareholder in the business because there was existing technology and progress brought into Payble from day one. And of course, then external funds raised from CBA via X15 Ventures.
Yeah, super interesting. I mean, I don't think that's a common story, but it's really cool to hear that, where there's kind of an intrapreneur mindset that actually gets formalized into a separate entity, which becomes a startup. That's pretty cool and quite smart, actually, I think, on both of your sides, actually. On your side, because of the acceleration that you managed to benefit from because of existing technology and structure. And I guess from their side, because they get to sort of have an investment that would probably has a better chance of paying higher dividends than had they just sort of rolled it out within their existing structures. So that's really interesting. So tell me what it looks like today. It's still early days for you guys, but...
Oh, sorry. I was just going to say on that, there might be people, who are working for corporates, thinking about that, are these, what's the difference between an idea versus a project versus a business? And to us, it came down to, this was a business that was better off standalone. It was better acting like a startup, not acting like a small listed entity, and also commercially being able to prove to the business. So this was going to be a non-core use case. And when you're a small listed entity, you need to make sure you're focused on your core, because you got to prove a lot to the market. And so being able to say, look, we can get external funds to back this and grow this. So let's call it, the balance sheet risk is low. It's not pouring money into a startup. We know startups take years and years to be able to turn a profit. It actually made really good business sense for all parties. And there generally is a structure. You have to have a supportive CEO in that business and a supportive board, but that entrepreneurs should be able to find a structure to actually make this work. As you said, Mike, it doesn't happen a lot, and it does surprise me because it often makes really good business sense to do it this way.
Yeah. I love what you said there, and I think there's potentially an entire episode on like what's the difference between a venture and a project and a feature, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it's tricky, right? Because I think a lot of people get this wrong, and what I mean by this is they stop focusing on their core. And they get distracted and they make a mistake. But similarly, we need to also have the space and the slack, and let's call it the quote unquote inefficiencies, to be able to not focus on core, because that's where innovation comes from. So I think it's really interesting there, like that difference between, like, I love what you said, like the difference between, like, I can't remember the exact words, but basically the difference between like a product or a feature and an actual venture that you would spin off outside of the listed company. So tell me what Payble looks like today. You guys are still quite young. You've raised a little bit of capital. Talk to me about the metrics that you're comfortable sharing. What's the team size like? What's the traction like? Describe Payble to us as it looks today.
Yeah, sure. So team size, we've got a team of 6 now, and we're recruiting to bring that to 8, and one more in the technology team and one more in the growth team. We are pre-launch, but we have our first customer. So we focused on building our proposition about fixing failed and late payments before they happen, based around ensuring we had a merchant at the heart of that, because our proposition works by actually solving a problem for the consumer, but there's a dependency on making sure that the merchant, the people that want to get paid, actually benefit from this product. So we spent, and I spent sort of personally drawing on that brief time I had as a consultant at PwC, but working with a bunch of large merchants in Australia, mainly in the utilities sector, and then focusing on the one utility that we thought was small enough to work with us, but big enough where fixing, the call centers are expensive and fixing payments is a priority. And with that, we essentially consulted, sat down, worked at how they do things today, where the inefficiencies are. And obviously we wanted to bring to the table that we want open banking. We want the consumers being able to self-manage. We sort of had these principles, but we weren't sure exactly where, other than solving the problem, where the individual bits of value lie for the merchant, other than getting the bill paid. We know that. But what's the highest friction point within the merchant? And obviously call center is one, because that's a clear cost, but also, the lack of reconciliation between when a payment plan is established to when a payment plan ends. Often in the middle, there's not a lot of reconciliation. So we actually sat down, went through call center staff, people who, finance managers from junior to senior, managing whose job was to manage this, and worked out where we could improve it. And then from there, we developed a prototype that was mainly a front end with an immature back end. Front end was just iOS native, back end was Ruby, just for speed there, but integrated with that chosen merchant's billing system, so that we could show, hey, if we detect you're going to get this payment late, and we then contact the user this way, and that user then makes an action, we then store that repair or that action in your billing system. Like, showed them from left to right. And we say, this is the touch point that solves, this is the touch point that solves. And based off that success, they signed a contract with us that they would launch as our first merchant on platform, so that their customers will have a Payble QR code on their bills. Consumer can scan that to pay, or if they need more time to pay, they scan that and they can select a flexible payment option, like create an installment plan, or fee free, or push back the due date a couple weeks to something that aligns with them. So going back to the heart of your question, we are pre-launch on that. So we're about to send we've got to call it a generic consumer app going live that's a bit of a biller directory. So you could pick, as you sign up, you pick who your major billers are. You pick if you're having any problems with bills, and then we can show you for those billers, look, if you needed to pay an installment plan, here's how you'd request that from that merchant. But the point of Payble is not directing you to, in the future, is not directing you to the call center or not directing you to the paper form. It's that you can do those things directly within the app with a push of the button. And we would want to onboard all those billers. So instead of it essentially Payble being a front end that directs back to a high cost process for them, it's all done within the app. And our first merchant, which where all that is done in the app, should be live mid-November.
So, I mean, a lot of wisdom there. I mean, I guess what jumped out at me is like, you guys went straight to proving that it works, which is great. So you're pre-launch, but all of your focus sound like, hey guys, what is the quickest, cheapest, and most effective way for us to just prove that this works? So I love what you said there, sort of, just brushing over the technology and going, we did this because it was quick and because we needed it to be fast. We got validation very early, which is probably why it was, I'm guessing, relatively easy for you to raise some seed capital, because you kind of went in there and you said, hey, we've done the thing. We've proved the thing. We have a long way to go, but we've sort of taken the question mark out of whether this is going to work. It's more a question of how well it's going to work. What I want to ask you, though, is, arguably the most important thing in startups is timing. A lot of people will say we don't invest in technology, or we don't invest in ideas, we invest in people. And that's true. You do invest in people. But if your timing is wrong, you can have the best team in the world and it won't work. And similarly, if your timing is fantastic, you can have a subpar product and a subpar team, but still have a very successful business. Your problem that you're trying to solve, this is not a new problem, right? This has existed since the beginning of utilities, which is a pretty old industry. Why now? Why is the timing right now? Because this is not a new problem. It's not something that's just existed. You guys have gone, okay, let's try and solve this. But when you think about the timing of what you're doing, why do you think the timing is right for you to be doing this now?
Mike, I agree with you 100%. And also on timing, particularly from the investor's point of view, the reason investors often invest on thematics is because that's timing driven. They see right now this is the theme that's working, and so they look for businesses in that sector based around timing. They won't say it's timing, but they'll say it's thematically, it's what we're looking at. So I agree 100%. I would say there's a couple of things for that. Firstly, the technology is possible. So before CDR, before open banking, you couldn't easily see whether a consumer had sufficient funds to pay a bill. So you can't run something that's a proactive repair. Hey, Sam, your bill in 2 days is due. Looks like you don't have funds. Tap to fix, or tap to activate a payment extension, or need more time. So all those things are reactive. So you can, in our specific problem, our problem statement, you can pose the question now, how would your billing and collections process change if you knew which payments would fail and which wouldn't? And that's a huge thing for a merchant, because today they go, we don't know till we try. And then they try and add a little level of predictability. For example, this person has failed before, therefore they may fail again, therefore we put them in a different path. So first thing was technology. Second thing for us was consumer behavior. So definitely consumers are more happy to self-manage. That's something merchants like. They like consumers, self-managing, because it keeps them away from high-cost interactions like update my payment details or, change product. That's a general, that's a general industry shift that's happened for, people prefer the ATM to the bank teller. Like that's not new. But what's specifically new about that is consumers' desire for flexibility. So two things that I grabbed onto here. One is COVID. So we started this business before COVID, and we believed in this thesis. But COVID has shown to consumers, particularly here in Australia, that you can demand flexibility. If you don't pay, your merchants will work with you. Now, before they would work with you too. If you rang them and said, hey, I can't afford this bill, what can we do? They would have a discussion with you and generally find a solution, because it's in their interest to keep you on the product and keep getting paid. But now there's a certain more of a comfort around consumers knowing, well, and this is, a lot of this is from regulation. Utilities haven't been able to disconnect consumers. Utilities have to offer hardship programs. There's like a 6-month process there from non-payment to termination. Council rates. So we're looking to work with a number of councils where we've got conversations with, your rates cannot be sent to debt collection now if you do not pay, and most councils have waived interest. So now there's a lesson here to consumers. Look, I can't afford it. I don't want to pay it. I should be given flexibility. I should have more options. Why don't I have options? It's a demand. And you can see now with, buy now, pay later type businesses, if taught consumers, you can access flexibility. Now that's not on the, not really on the merchant end because the merchant gets paid up front. But the lesson to the consumer there is, hey, this is your upfront payment, but here's all your options. And that's something that's not common in the sort of bigger businesses that were like the billers who bill you for a service. So those probably are the main three for us. And I'd say there's probably a fourth one, and that's sort of the ability now. So if I look back at sort of the first real tech company that I started with, it was called 1 Cent Flights, and this was Australia's first travel auction site. And it was back in 2012. We were fully remote. We were young. I was still at uni. We didn't really have and it's not that the tech didn't exist. We didn't have the tools and the ability and the understanding then to how to run a proper remote business where you have there was no Slack. There was no common meeting cadences. Everyone was running things on waterfall. That is a timing change too. Now, that's not unique to us, but I'm very conscious of it. Like the pace at which you can move today in a startup is significantly faster than the pace that we had the ability to move at in 2012. It's also cheaper in terms of output because you can collaborate quicker and there's more off-the-shelf solutions. But I would say, so I guess there's probably two things there, the tech and the tools that are sort of generic to most startups. But two things there for us, the consumer flexibility and COVID really, really in our problem area and helping what we're doing.
Yeah, I think, it's incredible seeing what open banking is enabling around the world. In Australia, there's a specific framework, but in the UK, obviously, I think they're pretty much leading the charge. But it's amazing how many founders I'm seeing now that are building products that they just simply could not have built before the advent of open banking. And we're just getting started. So I think we're still going to see a massive wave of new businesses springing up that open banking is enabling. So on that note, from what I can tell then, Payble is an API first play. Like you have a consumer facing app for reasons that you've just mentioned. But from what I can understand, this is an API. It's an API first business enabled by the open banking framework. Talk to me about, assuming that that's correct. If it's not, please do correct me. But assuming that's correct, talk to me about some of the challenges that you've encountered along the way of building an API first product. It's quite a different approach building a B2C app that people play Candy Crush on or, or doing something that's very much consumer focused versus building an API first product are quite different things. What are some of the challenges, or we can reword that, opportunities? In other words, things that if you get right really differentiate you. But what are some of the challenges that you have encountered and are encountering building an API first product for the market?
Yeah, it's difficult, it's difficult in that you have multiple dependencies, multiple stakeholders, and it's about the consumer, but it's also about making sure, if that what we do is able to be transmitted to the merchant because they're the ones that pay us and they're the ones whose problem we solve creates value for them and allows us to capture some value, but for the consumer has to have a great experience too. So just to sort of lay it out, as you said, we have a consumer app that consumers use to pay and manage their bills. They interact with Payble, and it's a Payble app, but depending on which your biller, when you select your biller, it's a co-branded biller Payble experience. But this isn't your My Account dashboard within that biller. This is Payble. And then within that app, we collect payment information from the user directly, or we do it via open banking. So we establish a link from the consumer, from the app to the open banking ecosystem. Then to transmit any data that we have consent to transmit to the merchant, for example, a request to get a payment extension on that bill, we then have to integrate with that merchant, and particularly with their ERP or their billing system. And that is it's probably the largest challenge in this business, Mike. And in fact, as a founder who is, I think technologically, I'm a non-technical founder, but technologically very comfortable enough, that I always enjoy wearing the product manager hat early in the days of the business and being obsessive about the consumer experience. I realized very quickly I needed industry heavy hitters to make sure this worked. I needed to get not a consumer facing CTO. I needed to get a CTO that has built complex systems with complex integrations before. And we did that. I had James Andrew Smith, who is actually the CIO of Identity. So I stole him from Identity. And so he's been involved in integrations of their product with MasterCard, HSBC, a bunch of tier one banks and payments companies. And the second one was I also hired John White. John White was the head of product and customer experience for BPay Group, which is the largest billing business in Australia, and all the big banks are investors. And they've got I wouldn't use the word monopoly in the sense of evil market power, but they are known as the place that you pay your bills through BPay, and there's custom rails for it. So the first thing was I was like, oh, I can do all the front end and the understanding of what consumers need to achieve. I can do all the consulting to sit with the merchants and understand how they want to get at what they want and what they need. But I can't do the bit that the architects all need to sit down and argue about, or at least to me, that's what it looks like. So I had to complement my skills there. In fact, James and John have been so key. I'd say I was the original founder of the business, but when they joined about sort of 6 months in, they joined as co-founders because this is a significant and this is a significant need of the business, but also they're the type of people that you would want as co-founders.
Yeah. So look, it's a common question, and I was actually going to ask you the question, but you've answered it for me around talk to me about your technical co-founder, and you've just answered that because it's so critical. You can have the subject matter expertise, you can have the domain knowledge, you can have the product knowledge, but I think technical co-founders are just becoming so critical to businesses building technology applications. And you've absolutely just sort of validated that. So talk to me about the tech stack. Talk to me about it from a non-technical perspective. So, tech stack is sort of it's a strategic choice as well as a technical choice. So you mentioned in the beginning that you built in a certain tech stack. I know that from our pre-interview, you now have shifted over to a different tech stack. What I want to ask you is not from a technical perspective so much, but from a strategic perspective. What is the tech stack that you've chosen, and why have you chosen that tech stack? And as I said, I'm more interested from a sort of founder strategic perspective than I am from a technical perspective on what that choice was driven by.
Yeah, sure. And it's something I needed the advice on, right? So my goals as a founder is to make sure that our technology can move quickly, it can scale, and particularly in fintech, most fintech businesses are scale businesses. And if you, in terms of how you manage it, if you accrue tech debt that slows scale, you potentially slow the success of your business. Or in fact, you would certainly slow the success of the business. So strategically, I needed our technology to be able to enable scale. It needed to be able to recruit for was actually a particularly large one that might not have registered in people's people's consideration set previously, and now with most of our hiring taking place since the start of COVID, recruiting is very difficult, and so we actually made the decision that we had to choose technologies that were responsive, that were quick, that were modern, that were serverless, that were useful, but also that were commonly known, that were rising, and that we would have a large pool of candidates who found that technology, one, exciting and wanted to work on it, but two, they would be brought up to speed, they would know it. So it wasn't, when we looked at things like Flutter, so Flutter's great, it was exciting. Initially it was like, wow, this is cool. But it was like, oh, the market for Flutter engineers is tiny, and it may not grow because it may, it may not become the language that everyone was. This is more than a year ago now. Everyone's tipping this is the next one, or at least from a non-technical co-founder. This is what you hear. Oh, this is the cool one. This is what everyone's doing. You hear these things. So along with the tech requirements that had to enable a rapid build, the ability to change, the ability to scale, it had to be rising in popularity and large enough in popularity today that it wouldn't slow down our ability to hire engineers. Yeah,
absolutely. And look, for what it's worth, I remember from the pre-interview, I think your stack is React, React Native, Node, and AWS, if I remember correctly. And that's exactly what we specialize in. And it's interesting because we're on the services side, but what you've just described is pretty much the exact same set of reasons that we chose to specialize in this 3 years ago. I actually remember, I remember quite clearly that we were on an offsite and we were deciding, because we used to kind of do everything for everyone. We had a Ruby team, we had a .NET team, we had a JavaScript team, and it was like, this is crazy, guys. We can't be everything to everyone. We need to become the best in the world at one thing. What is it going to be? And when we landed on the stack, I remember quite clearly one of my co-founders and our CTO, I remember him going, God, I can't actually believe I'm agreeing to this, because it's not like he was kind of laughing about it, but it was like, it's not that it's necessarily the best tech, but it absolutely is the best tech decision from a strategic perspective, for the exact reason that you just spoke about, that if you choose some exotic language or framework, which is super cool at the time, you might just not be able to find people to work on it in 2 years' time. And you might incur an enormous debt and risk to your business because no one can build on the platforms you've chosen. So it's interesting hearing it from the product side, because it's exactly the same set of decisions we made from the services side. And this is actually a good segue into the next thing I want to talk about, which is, the talent market is absolutely crazy at the moment. We've never, ever had this much interest and this amount of inbound leads to build product, right? We specialize in the fintech and blockchain space, so it's a little bit more specialized than just a generalist company. But I have never, ever seen the talent space so aggressive, so difficult, and so expensive, just to be blunt. Which changes things for a lot of startups, right? Like over the years, we've had many conversations where people are like, oh, no, Mike, we'll never outsource. We insource everything. We'll only ever hire people. That has just pretty much dropped across the board, from the big companies to the small companies, because even if you want to build an in-house team, if you raise, we've got clients now who've raised a hell of a lot of money in sort of Series D and Series C sort of rounds. And in some cases, over $80 million. And the challenge now seems to not be so much raising capital. Capital seems relatively easy to get now if you have a decent product. The challenge now seems to be like the ability to deliver against the roadmap fast enough. And it's just incredibly difficult to find talent. So you guys are in the early stages, which has got pros and cons for talent. It's got pros because it's really cool being like, in the first 10 employees. That's really cool for a growing startup. It's got challenges because you don't necessarily have the resources that you can throw at the market like a very well-funded, more mature startup can do. With all of that said, how are you thinking about insourcing versus outsourcing? How are you thinking about attracting talent versus working with great talent that isn't necessarily employed by you? Where's your head at with all of this? Because it's a very difficult problem to solve at the moment. Talk to me about how you're thinking about this.
Yeah, we've been on a journey with that. So I think from my perspective, we do need to initially build capability in-house that we have. We build that human capital, that understanding of what Payble is, how we work, our core technology, but that is readily complementable from external sources. And those external sources can be about speed. They can be discrete projects. Or they can be about things that you thought were internal, but you can't move quickly enough, so you need to find someone to almost jump on it. We with the initial prototype we built, which was Ruby and Swift, we actually worked with an external team that had all worked together before. We did actually engage them as contractors individually, but we chose them because those three people had worked together before on other projects. In fact, they all worked together at Loot, which was a UK fintech that had a digital wallet, digital card in UK, and unfortunately they went into administration about 2 years ago. And Identity actually acquired their technology. So as part of that process, I got to know the CTO at Loot, and essentially asked him, say, hey, we're working on something here called Payble, or it wasn't even called Payble back then, but we're working on something here. Do you want to come across and contract and help us get started? But also, who is the best team you've got internally? And that was incredibly useful for us because it meant we could start. Day one wasn't, so day one, it almost felt like I didn't have a CTO because it wasn't those co-founder CTO moments where you're staying late to get. In fact, this team was offshore, mainly in the UK. So I didn't have a business partner, but I had a technology partner. So it meant that I could focus very cleanly on what I was doing, which was, working directly with the merchant, trying to solve their problem, and then delivered to them, this is what I need. Like, the technology must be able to achieve these things. Yeah. And then they could simply determine the simplest way to achieve it, because it was time boxed. It was purposely a short period. Let's get this prototype out. And that was a really good way of doing it. Then when we got the larger investment come through, said we do need in-house CTO. I also need someone here who's with me who can, come to meetings and help sell. So that was the change in tact. But we do, our current plan is to continue to build our team internally. So we've got 3 in that team now, and I think we'll take it to 5 quite soon. And then it's eyes wide open on how we deliver each part of what we're doing. But also things like, the initial hang-ups I had personally, Mike, was, how do you get the alignment? How do you get people feeling part of the team? Or are they not part of the team? Is it deliverables based on a project? A lot of that is pretty easily solved. And the more I've learned about how a lot of call it agencies or providers work, is there's actually a lot of good models out there where they go, no, we don't immerse ourselves in your team because we know how to do this as not part of your team. That's why you're coming to us. You don't want more people in your team. You want this result. And then there's others who go, we'll rent you some contractors, and they are part of the team. And I used to be more on the we need contractors who are internal, who feel part of the team kind of vibe. And now I'm probably more on the no, let's complement our internal team with externals when needed. And those externals are probably on discrete projects or discrete needs that we have that need to work. We need to work very quickly on.
I think it's also the difference between a vendor and an expert, right? Like, if we think about the vendor model, a vendor is someone that you say, hey, do this thing and give me the thing that I've told you to do. And they do it and they give it to you. And that's more commoditized, and that's more kind of generally commoditized and therefore cheaper. The expert is a firm that you go to and you say, can you guide us through this thing? And therefore, we want you to run your process. We want you to deliver the thing to us, but we recognize an expert status. And that differentiation between a vendor and an expert, I think, is quite important when you're working with a partner. There's a place for both of them. Absolutely. Like, guns for hire. And then there's a place for the experts, which is like, hold on, these guys actually might do this thing better than we know how to do it. So let's not get in their way, and let's get them to guide us through the process. And in some cases, even do some knowledge transfer along the way. It's really interesting. I love asking this question. Obviously, it's a loaded question because this is what we do. But every single founder I speak to has a different answer, which is true. It is different for every single company, and it's different for every single project. It really is. There is no one size fits all. So I'm conscious of time, Elliott. So I want to move on to some more rapid fire style questions. So you look like a very healthy, clean cut dude, and that does some boxing on the side. But why I'm saying that is because building a startup is really, really difficult. It's emotional. It's it's all manner of things that are difficult. And generally what we see on LinkedIn and social media are all the social media worthy bits. But the 90% of time in between that is usually just like really difficult, hard work, often quite soul destroying, etc. And I'm a massive believer in behavior, habits, optimization, all of that kind of stuff. Do you have any daily routines or habits or behavior that you rely on to maintain optimal performance? And I just want to stress that word, optimal performance, not peak performance, because I don't believe in peak performance, because then I think you drop. Yeah. So what do you do on a daily basis that helps you just maintain this kind of cadence that you can maintain?
So I do, and it's absolutely routine based. And in fact, I've been experimenting with my routine quite recently, and experimenting not in I don't know. I often hesitate with these things, Mike, because you see on the LinkedIn, I'm in the 3 a.m. club. I wake up at 3 a.m., listen to 10 podcasts, run 100 miles. And then by 5 a.m. I'm, in the off, and you just kind of go, this is ridiculous. And it is ridiculous because it's not possible. And to me, a good routine is something that keeps you, I think optimal is the right word, but for me, it keeps me productive, keeps me happy, and it keeps me focused on what we need to achieve, and doesn't necessarily draw me into like the day-to-day toing and froing that you get in the business. Sort of need to work on the business as well as in the business, which is really important even when you're small. But yeah, my routine. So I get up at 4:45 a.m. So alarm 4:45, and jump out of bed, because otherwise I stay in bed. And then from there, I just get ready. Actually get into my training clothes, because I will go and train. But I actually sit down at the desk at about 5 a.m. And then that is where I'd call it day planning, but I'm actually not. A lot of people, then write down their tasks and they do like sort of their vision. For me, it's not. For me, it's actually opening up. It's the first time I open up and check my emails, which not a task I like. I don't like email. I open up my email and go, what's new? And I seek to understand what's changed in the business, or what is now urgent and what is now need to be done. And it takes me about 15 minutes. And then I will use about an hour of what I have as focused work time. So working on something that requires my deep thought, independent of things the team needs. So it might be redoing a proposal to a merchant, or trying to solve a specific use case problem, or updating investor materials. But things that I need to get in a state of flow without disturbance, and that's like team disturbance, which is never a negative. But during the day, Slack's buzzing, all these things are buzzing. You're pulled in. I do a lot of sales, so I'm pulled in from 30-minute meeting to 30-minute meeting. And also personal, like it's quiet in the house, so I don't have to get up. I don't have kids, so I'm fortunate I can sort of lock myself away. Then I go and train. So about 6:45, 6:30, I'll train. I'll normally box or run, but it takes about an hour. And then when I get back, have my breakfast, and then join our team call, which is we do a daily check-in. It used to be a stand-up, but given we're all remote now, it's let's kick off the day, how's things, and we do that on the dot at 9 a.m. But it means by that 9 a.m. I understand where the business is that day. I check what we've prioritized. I can sort of delegate things that might be new, but also I've achieved the bit I need to lock myself away on. I've either done it, or I've made a significant step on it, so that by the time the day starts and I've got multiple meetings and sales meetings, and I'm moving between multiple tasks, I've already done the thing that would have been difficult to me to then go, hey, I need silence, I need to focus. I've done that bit. And then sort of the day kind of runs normally, if you will. And we have, team check-ins. We often have a team lunch together, virtually. And then by about dinner time, obviously because I'm at home, dinner time, I log off, have dinner, and then I try to disconnect myself from the business from about 6 p.m. Although if it's busy, I'll come back at about 8:30 and do 30 minutes. But when you get up at 4:45, you have to be in bed by 9 or 9:30, or you'll run yourself into the ground. So I'm very protective of my sleep. Like I'll happily stay up if it's phenomenally urgent, but I'll also happily say not urgent, off to bed.
Yeah, I love it, and I resonate a lot with that. I think I have a very similar fundamental daily that I try to do every day, which I call it not letting the world in. So very similar to you, but I've just found also because I'm quite ADHD, like I'm quite all over the place. So for me to actually focus is quite difficult. So what works phenomenally well for me is it's very similar to you, but the night before, I pick the most important thing that I need to do for the next day. And I do that thing before I open WhatsApp, before I open Slack, before I open email, before I have a phone call, before I do anything. I do that most important thing. And it's amazing, isn't it? Like what it does for your, I almost want to say confidence, because it's like before the world has even gotten hold of you and generally woken up, you've already done the thing that you needed to make that day feel successful. And then everything that comes at you the rest of the day, you don't have this thing hanging over you going, oh, but I've got to find time to do this thing. I've got to find time to do this thing. So not quite exactly what you do, but very similar sort of, I guess, fundamentals. And I see that quite regularly with high performance people is they have the ability to be deliberate about what needs to be done and then to do it before other stuff sort of starts hammering them in the day. You are right. It is easier when you don't have kids, but it's still possible when you do have kids. So, it's just about prioritization. Awesome. Elliott, I want to move to the rapid fire questions now. So just quick questions, quick answers. So what scares you in business?
Oh, a lot of things scare me. There's so much we've got to do. I'm a fearful person, and I worry a lot. Not getting enough customers, picking the wrong sector to target, doing something wrong with my team, not recruiting right. I'm very fearful, and I could this could be potentially a 10-minute response, but and obviously running out of money and having not achieved what we need to do before our next fundraising round. But so much, like, this is really hard to do. It's really stressful.
I love the honesty, man, because it is fucking terrifying building a business at times. So I love the honesty. What content are you consuming currently?
So I use content often as a distraction, as in I'm disconnecting. So I've been watching Squid Game on Netflix, which right now is probably the most popular show on Netflix. I also read. So I read in bed. I'm reading Radical Candor right now, which is a great book on building strong relationships, but being direct with your team and with people. And I consume podcasts. So obviously, Mike, I'm a habitual listener to you, but The Economist and New York Times. So I often I'll read and I'll drift off to sleep with some news in my ear.
Yeah, excellent. What is the last book that you read cover to cover?
Oh, I've almost finished Radical Candor, so I will say Radical Candor.
Awesome. So over the next 7 days, what is something that you're going to be doing to improve yourself or your craft?
So I've got a sales coach, a sales mentor. It's not just sales. It's more it's growth, it's startup, it's the whole thing. But I'm investing time with him, and we're going to look at sort of how our go-to-market's going with our sectors. But it's less about the business and more how I'm approaching things, why I've made the decisions I have, what information I'm using, and then particularly we're trying to shortcut parts of the sales cycle that we're getting held up in. How do we find those solutions? But it's focused less on the business, more about me. How am I making these decisions? How can I make them better?
So we've spoken about a lot of stuff today, which is great. I love how we bounced around a bit. But if there was just one thing that you would want the listeners to leave with today, Elliott, what would that one thing be?
So I would hope there's people listening who may be in the early days of their startup, like real early days, or have got an idea that they're holding on to that they want to start. And I would say it's about that imposter syndrome. Like, don't be afraid. This is an awfully hard journey. You will doubt yourself. You will raise money. And then the minute you've raised that money, you will think, what have I done? I've made all these promises we need to deliver on. And people slap you on the back, and your parents don't understand. They say, well done. And you want to say, this isn't well done. This is me signing myself up to a lot of stress. And that's okay. That's how it feels. There's a lot more consciousness, I think, around most people about how difficult this is. The highs are high, the lows are low, but I think the middle ground isn't middle. The middle ground is, I have so much to do. My team is relying on me. I've promised investors a lot. I've promised customers a lot, and you're always conscious of that. And that is scary, but it's something that you have to you sign up for it. And so what you also need to sign up for personally is it's okay to feel that way, and you keep pushing. You keep pushing.
I love that. Right in the beginning, you said, don't be scared. I would say, be scared, be very scared, but do it anyway, right? Which is because it is scary. So I love it. I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. And I can see that that's how you operate. Elliott, it's been super cool talking to you. Thank you so much for making the time. Do you like to be contacted or followed? And if you do, how can the listeners best contact or follow you?
Yeah, sure. I think LinkedIn is great. I don't tweet, and I don't promote myself a lot on Facebook or anything like that. But LinkedIn, add me on LinkedIn. I'm sure my name will be here or maybe up here, depending on if people are watching the video. Also, you can email me at elliott@payble.com.au. I also publish a monthly column on our website called Elliott's Ex Gratia, which is my thoughts on what I'm seeing in industry and what sort of leaders are telling me, because I get to meet lots of exciting leaders across this space. You could sign up to that if you're interested. Perhaps if you think there's any wisdom in what I've said, you could perhaps get a bit more of that to your inbox too.
Awesome. Elliott, thanks so much for making the time today. It's been really great talking to you, and I appreciate you making the effort because I know you're very busy.
Thank you so much, Mike. Really appreciate being here. You have built a great podcast. You've had some amazing leaders on here. I'm very lucky that you chose to indulge me with this time. So thank you.
Oh, it's only a pleasure, and thank you. And to the listeners, I hope you got some value from today's episode with Elliott from Payble. I definitely did. I just, once again, I get to meet a lot of really smart people doing great things, and and Elliott certainly falls into that. And I'm always really surprised but encouraged at the honesty and the rawness of people that are clearly very smart, clearly very capable, and still just going, this shit is hard and it's scary. But that's the thing, is we've got to just do it anyway. And I think we've got to destigmatize the whole, I've got my shit together and I'm just doing this and it's easy, because it's not. I speak to enough people to know now that there is not a founder that's building anything decent that considers it easy. So I just found that really, really refreshing. Thanks for listening to the show. And if you'd like to discuss your fintech or blockchain project with us, you're welcome to book a call with one of our principals or myself on our website, which is www.nona.digital. And I'll be back next week with another episode to explore the Fintech Founder Journey.